What's up, everybody? It's Jason Cruz here once again with another episode of The Legal Submission. And as always, before we start these things, I'd like to always ask, as a commercial here, like the video, visit the YouTube channel, subscribe, visit MMA Payout, look for us on Twitter, and of course the Substack. Now, while we don't discuss a legal case at this point in this episode of The Legal Submission, we may have a big case coming down the road in what I'm going to discuss right now, and that is USADA's noisy withdrawal from its relationship with the UFC and the UFC's response to USADA's noisy withdrawal. And this all centers around Conor McGregor and how he was going to be reintroduced into the USADA testing pool. Now, last Monday, this is being taped on October 16th, but last Monday, Travis Tygart sent a tweet, or heck, an X, through social media, the CEO of USADA, stating that as of 2024, the relationship between the UFC and USADA will be severed. They will not renew for any more amount of time the relationship regarding the UFC's anti-doping policy. Now, while this all may be well and good, it was clear from the social media post from Tygart that there was animosity between the UFC and USADA. Basically stating, inferring that the relationship was strained and severed due to the fact that Conor McGregor was returning to the USADA testing pool. Now, it's been a while since we've combed over the anti-doping policy implemented by the UFC and enforced by USADA, but there is a 6-month minimum for an athlete to be in the USADA testing pool prior to a fight. And as we all recall, there is an exemption to this rule in the anti-doping policy statement. And that has only really been used once of note, and that was Brock Lesnar's return at UFC 200. Now, without going down that path again, we know that Brock Lesnar returned to UFC 200 in July. It was announced, I believe, at UFC 199 at the beginning of June of that year. So, giving less than the requisite amount, 6 months, and allowing under the exemption for Lesnar to return at a breakneck pace, I guess you could say. USADA did test Lesnar. He was clean up until his, I believe, the last week in June when he was tested, but those did not come through until after his fight. And as we all know, Lesnar tested for a banned substance. While he denied it, it was still clear from the testing that it was there. And as a result, Mark Hunt sued the UFC, Dana White, and Brock Lesnar. Now, we know that Hunt's case did not go his way, and in fact, it was dismissed actually last month, and we probably won't see another appeal in that case. But that was the only case of note in which the UFC or Lesnar or the powers that be utilized that 6-month exemption window. Now, take us to this Conor McGregor situation. We don't know all the underlying facts regarding McGregor's return, but you might infer from the USADA tweet by Tygart that they ended the relationship with the UFC, or the UFC ended the relationship with them based upon McGregor's return. Whether it be that they wanted McGregor to come in earlier via the exemption, or there were other extenuating circumstances regarding his return. Now, the UFC returned fire next day. Obviously, the UFC would not let these comments go without their own response. And in fact, it was Hunter Campbell and Jeff Novitzky, former USADA guy, Jeff Novitzky, responding and really fanning the flames of potential lawsuit. It was Hunter Campbell, who is an attorney, indicating that USADA had Thursday by 5 p.m. to retract its statements and issue an apology regarding what it said in its social media post by Targart. As we know, that apology did not come to pass, so we could be heading down a lawsuit path. Now, the press conference, as I said, fanned the flames. From what their side of the story, the UFC side of the story, it was a phone conference between Nowitzki, Campbell, and Tygart, and maybe other people were there. I don't know, but those are the main characters in this story. And they claimed that it was at that telephone conference on October 8th that they told USADA they were not going through with the relationship any longer. They were severing the contract, which was to go through 2023. There were talks earlier in the year about extending the contract. The UFC had indicated it was USADA was the gold standard, but now we have it here that two parties can no longer exist, and in fact, it was the UFC, according to their statement, that severed the ties. Instead, that they were no longer going to negotiate a contract, and in fact announced at the same press conference that DFSI, the Drug-Free Sport International, I believe, would be their new enforcement agency going forward in 2024, making the relationship between the UFC and USADA a little tenuous for the next couple months as they finish out their relationship. Now, a lot of things were said by Hunter Campbell and Jeff Novitzky at their press conference, and essentially saying that Travis Tygart flipped out when it was known that USADA would not be the enforcement agency for the UFC any longer. They also indicated that the UFC did that the agency USADA was receiving most of its revenue through the UFC, essentially saying that they were a big cash cow for USADA and kept them afloat. Now, that's my interpretation of it, but obviously he put that inference out there because he wanted people to make it known that the UFC was big in business for USADA, and the fact that they were severing ties really made Tygart angry. So it was the UFC that claimed that they could sue for defamation of USADA for statements made by Tygart in their social media posts. Now, we have to look at what the elements of defamation are, and they are a false statement purporting to be fact, publication or communication of that statement to a third person, fault amounting to at least negligence, and damages of some harm caused to the reputation of the person or entity who is the subject. Now, that's the bright line green book definition of defamation. It could vary from state to state, but that's basically what you get, is that you have a false statement assumed to be true or claimed to be true, publication or communication of that statement to a third person, so said it in public, fault amounting to at least negligence, now we'll talk about that in a sec, and damages. So there has to be some harm done, not just someone saying bad words to you and there's no real monetary damages. And that's what they're really talking about in terms of damages, monetary issues. Now, what constitutes negligence? So first, you can infer the UFC claiming that Tygart made a false statement, whether it be about Conor McGregor or severing ties with the UFC or something of that nature. So communicate to a third person. He sent it out through social media, so there's clearing number 2. Now, arising to something to equate to negligence. So negligence, the textbook definition of negligence is failure to take proper care in doing something. So usually when we talk about negligence in these types of arenas, it's mainly either saying something recklessly with reckless disregard, or knowingly, which is maybe a higher level, but still, knowingly saying a false statement, asserting it to be true. And then the damages part is, are you claiming damages as a result of those false statement communicated to a third party? So for the UFC to prove that, they would have to indicate that whatever Tigert was saying was false, and that it was either in reckless disregard, or he knowingly knew it was false but still said it anyway. The damages obviously are damages to a reputation, damages to the reputation of the UFC, damages to Conor McGregor, things of that nature. Now those can be proven in an assortment amount of ways. They usually, for the UFC, it's a loss of business. Same with McGregor, that he couldn't fight because USADA claimed that he needed to be in 6 months, which infers that he was taking a banned substance of some sort. There's that. So those issues could come to a head if there is a lawsuit. Now, on the flip side, could USADA sue the UFC? Now, you had, I believe, later in that week, Dana White referring to Travis Tigert, equating him to Britney Spears going crazy. Obviously, was meant to be in a pejorative statement, a pejorative, mean-spirited kind of way, almost inviting USADA into a legal fight, right? So for USADA, could they claim defamation, loss of business because of what the UFC is doing? Yeah, of course they could. Now, obviously, we go through the same factors. Was there a false statement here? It was obviously communicated to the press. Was the statement in reckless disregard, or did they knowingly know it was false? And damages, of course, you lose business or business opportunities there. I mean, that could lead to people thinking that you run a bad organization or a spiteful organization, or your business practices aren't correct. So there is that issue too. So I doubt this war words in the press will not lead to anything legal. So what I'm saying is that there probably will be some legal action taken by either USADA or the UFC related to these statements last week. For the UFC, they've already issued a mandate that they had issued an apology, and it's hard for me to think that an organization like the UFC would back down or not hold up to its words unless there was something that they could stand down from. Meaning that, did they talk? Maybe the UFC and USADA calms down, talks it out, issues joint apology or things of that nature. But the meltdown of the relationship seems really, really bad. I mean, Tigert, the CEO of USADA, essentially infers wrongdoing. I mean, that's what one person can infer. If you sever a relationship and have no ill will toward that other organization, you don't really say these types of things and make these types of inferences about Conor McGregor, whether or not he's going to fight by the end of the year, and the 6-month implementation into the USADA pool. For the UFC, obviously, they got picked into a fight and they came out swinging, making actually personal, what I would deem personal attacks against Tigert and his decision making and his demeanor in these types of business handlings. And this could be fatal for his his business reputation going forward if he were to interact on behalf of USADA in other types of testing issues. Now, USADA and the UFC have worked together. There have been multiple complaints about USADA and how it goes about its business, whether it be testing, whether it be how they contact people, whether it be the anti-doping policy and how it's implemented, whether it be the enforcement, the punitive nature of it, the bans of multiple years or less than that, the uneven nature that some people believe that USADA handles it. Whatever drug policy, anti-doping policy is going to go forward, there always will be scrutiny. And while DFSI has been touted as a great new organization, that's left to be seen. I mean, I'm sure they are a good I'm sure they're a good organization, but will fighters and managers and other administrators be critical of it when their first athlete is flagged? Probably. But we'll see how they work through it, what technologies they implement in their drug testing. But that will be for another day as we focus on the fight between UFC and USADA. It's something that you don't usually see as far as a severance of relationship. The UFC has ended relationships with sponsors in the past, and you never hear any ill will. And this is surprising because the UFC and USADA has been together for 6 years. And you hadn't heard too much in terms of bad words said in the press. And here we have a public fight. So we'll keep track of this. It's Jason Cruz, MMA Payout, The Legal Submission. Have a great day.